Hello and welcome to a new one chord a week video. This series has been going now for quite a while, and I think we're up to 20-something chords, and there's many more to come, and they will be coming. But at the same time, it is true that as we move along this series, we're kind of running out of chords that are truly fundamental. They're all interesting to me and they're all fun, and I will teach them to you, but truly chords that you must know, they're not that many, and I think today might be actually the last one that you truly need to know. So it's certainly an interesting chord, and it's going to be a pretty long video, I think, because it's a complex chord. Not difficult, but it is complex. So let's begin. The diminished seventh chord is a truly ubiquitous chord. You'll find it in all kinds of music. Starting from Bach, you'll find it in classical music, the Romantic classical period. You'll find it in rock, in pop, in all kinds of music, in the blues, in funk. Of course, you'll find it all over jazz standards and jazz adaptations of songs. It's really, truly everywhere. So much so that even the great theorist Arnold Schoenberg once said that, this chord has been used by everybody to do anything. When they don't know what to do, they just pop the diminished seventh chord in, which is not a great way to do it probably, but we will look at some of its uses as well as its sound. So before we do all that, let's see how we build it. It's actually a very simple and interesting formula, so let's check it out. The diminished seventh chord is, of course, based on a diminished triad. In case you missed the diminished triad, here's a link where we go into a little bit of detail about its sound. And on top of that diminished triad, we just add a diminished seventh. Now, if you remember, we talked about this chord in passing in another video, which was on the minor 7 flat 5 chord. Again, here's a link. That chord is also called half diminished. Now, in that case, we were using a diminished triad and adding a minor seventh on top of it. This chord we are doing today, the diminished seventh, is a bit different. We still start from a diminished triad and we still add a seventh to it, but it will be a diminished seventh. So what's a diminished seventh, you might ask? And it's pretty simple. The diminished seventh is the interval that is 1/2 step lower than a minor seventh. So if a minor seventh is 1 whole step below the root or below the octave, you have to go 1 extra step down to find the diminished seventh. So this gets a bit confusing with names, so we're going to look at it right now. It's very simple. The seventh of a chord must have the name of the seventh note. So let's start with that. If we're in C and we literally count up to 7 with our fingers, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. The seventh of C has to be a B. It can't be any other note, all right? It has to be a B. And now we make sure that it fits the description of a diminished seventh, which is 3/2 steps below the octave. Okay, so if I have C as my octave and I work my way down 3 frets, because it's the same as 3/2 steps, I end up in this note here, which you might look at it and go like, okay, that's an A. It is an A, but we have to name it as a B because the diminished seventh is a seventh, and the seventh is B, as we saw earlier counting on our hand. And so how do we make a B sound like an A? Well, we have to lower it twice, so we have to call it B double flat. And indeed, in this chord, the seventh will be spelled as double flat 7. And double flat B, okay? And here's how we build it. We have our basic minor triad, which is C as the root, minor third as the minor third, another minor third as the diminished fifth, which is G flat, and now we have to add another minor third, which is the B double flat. And if you can see here, it does sound like an A, it looks like an A, but we have to call it B double flat so that we maintain the right interval, which is the seventh. Another thing that I'll discuss here in the formula section is how this chord is built by stacking minor thirds. As a matter of fact, it's all minor thirds. We have a minor third between the C and the E flat. We have the same distance between the E flat and the G flat, which is minor third to diminished fifth. We have another minor third, same distance, from the diminished fifth to the diminished seventh. So from G flat to B double flat. And then we have another minor third from the B double flat to the C, which is the root again. So it's all the same distance between each note. And that has a few consequences, which we're going to talk about in the sound section. Here's the unmistakable sound of the diminished seventh chord, and there's so many fascinating aspects about this chord. One of them we just discussed in the formula section. That's this, how symmetrical it is with all the minor thirds stacking one on top of the other. Another thing that you'll notice is that this chord has two tritones. It has two relationships of tritone between the root and the third and the fifth. That's one diminished fifth, of course. And another one is between the third and the seventh. That's another diminished fifth. And that makes it extremely tense and extremely dominant and extremely willing to resolve. Okay, so that's actually how this chord is used. It's used in all different kinds of ways, but always to resolve or to move or to go somewhere. All right, so that's the function of this chord. So much so that, as I mentioned in the intro, it got to a point where everybody was using it all the time because, you know, in classical music especially, modulations are carried out over sometimes a long period of time, and it's a very in-depth study of it. If you want to get into it, I suggest you read Arnold Schoenberg's Theory of Harmony. It's a big book, and it's not the easiest of all, but it's certainly very interesting. We did a video not too long ago about some of my favorite music books. Here's a link to that if you want to watch it. And you know, when Schoenberg came up, everybody was like, you know, because it is a bit scary, but it is a great book. And he goes into, you know, into this little digression on how this chord has been abused. But it is true that it's so strongly, you see that? How much you expect a resolution to it. Okay, so those two diminished fifths, or those two tritones, really contribute to it, and they tend to resolve inwards. And so we're going to talk about resolution, of course, for this chord. And the first resolution you'll find is considering this chord as a seventh degree. Okay, so you just consider it as the seventh chord, the dominant chord. So, for example, if we are in the key of C major, I would just use this on the B. So on the seventh degree of the scale, and use it to push up to the root. Okay, so B diminished seventh and C major. That's probably the easiest way to use it. There's another way to look at it, and again, Schoenberg, but also Walter Piston were, you know, partial to this way of looking at it, is instead of looking at it as a resolution 1/2 step up, so from 7 to 1, they suggested that we should look at this chord as a dominant flat 9 chord without the root. Now this might sound confusing to you, but let me just give you an example really quickly. Let's stick to the B diminished, okay? Because B diminished is the simpler way to look at it, because then it resolves to C major, right? So that's easier to look at because they're more natural notes. So if I have a B diminished seventh chord, I have the notes B, D, F, that's our diminished triad, and then I have an A flat, which is our diminished seventh. Okay, so we have B, D, F, A flat. Now I could look at it this way and say, okay, well, then this B diminished will resolve up to C. That's fine. But another way to look at it is this: if this chord had a note before it, which would be a G, if I add a G before this whole thing, I will get this following notes. I have G, B, D, F, and A flat. Now, the important thing about this is this allows me to look at it as a dominant chord, because G, B, D, F is a G7 chord, and the A flat is the flat 9. So I would have a dominant flat 9 chord, which again will strongly resolve to C, but now I can look at it as a resolution of a 5/1. I can look at it this way. So I'm looking at this B diminished, I'm pretending it's a G, dominant flat 9, resolving to C. And is it complicating things too much for no benefit? Not really. The resolution from 5 to 1 is very important. It's really at the basis of most cadences in music. And so from a theoretical point of view, it's very important to have an explanation for a chord that kind of defies explanation. And so having the ability to look at this and go, like, okay, I'm going to pretend that there's a G here, right? And so this makes this a dominant chord without the root, but it still functions as a dominant chord, and it's much easier to handle, right? So it's not a waste of time, and I think it's an interesting point, but certainly beyond the scope of this video, but if you want to explore it, check out Schoenberg's theory of harmony, and it delves deeper into it, but it's very interesting, all right? So that's another way to look at it. Another thing that's very interesting about this score, this will be a long video, is that now that we've explained how they resolve, it gets deeper, because if you have a chord that is absolutely 100% symmetrical, which means that all the notes are at the same distance, then all the notes can be any function within the chord. So when I play a C diminished chord, any of these notes is the root of the chord. It doesn't matter which one I consider to be the root, they all are, because they're all at the same distance. So if I have all my notes here and I switch them, they still maintain all the relationships. So in this chord, if I play, for example, again, C diminished seventh, which has a C, an E flat, a G flat, and a B double flat, all these notes are the root of the chord. They all are. Inversion of this chord are still the same chord. So what happens is that everything we talked about as far as resolving this chord, so going up a half step, or using it as a supposedly dominant flat 9 chord, not only does it allow us to resolve it one half step up from the bottom note, you can use any of these notes to resolve. So each of these chords resolve up to 4 different notes, correct? Because they're all roots. And so that's a very interesting aspect, and I will leave the exploration of it to you or to a future video that truly is beyond the scope of this video. And so that's certainly a very interesting aspect of this chord, which is symmetrical. So all the notes are roots. So with all this theory behind it, as you can expect, there are so many ways of using this chord. And I'm just going to give you 2 quick examples, all right? One way to use it is to resolve it to a minor chord. It tends to go very well chromatically to a minor chord. And one of its most common uses, at least in jazz music, is to go to the 2 chord. So we have the 1 chord is C, C major 7th, for example, and the 2 chord will be D minor 7th. You can use this diminished chord as a chromatic approach to the minor 7th from above. So we go to E flat diminished 7th, down to the 2, which is D minor 7th. So 1, flat 3 diminished, 2. And then you can continue with your cadence, for example. You can also use it ascending to the minor chords, even to the A. Beautiful sound. That's just one example of it. Another thing you can do is use it chromatically to go up to the 5th chord, so the G in this case. So we are in C major, and we're going to G7th. Before that G, we can use the F sharp diminished. So it would be chromatic up to the dominant. So we have C, F sharp diminished, G7th, and C. That's another use. And there are so many, but really is too much for just one video, but we'll get, into it in some other video or some other live stream or something like that, all right? So these are some of the sounds associated with this chord. I do suggest you study it further. By the way, I never mention it on these videos, but I do offer private tutoring for guitar, so there's links down there. If you need help with this, I will help you out, all right? And now finally something simple, which is the 3 fingerings. These are kind of easy. And we start with the 3rd fret of the 5th string, that's our C. Then we play the 4th fret of the 4th, which is our diminished 5th. We use the index finger on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string for the B double flat, which is the diminished 7th, and then we finish with this finger here, which is E flat on the 4th fret of the 2nd string. And that's our chord. Remember, I'm showing you this as C diminished 7th, but literally you are actually playing E diminished 7th, G flat diminished 7th, and B double flat or A diminished 7th. You're actually playing all these chords at once. So today you're learning 4 chords for the price of 1. The next position, we're moving up to the 8th fret. Again, I often try to give you a position here, and we have the root on the 8th fret of the 6th string. We're skipping the 5th string as always, make sure you mute it. and then we play 7, 8, and 7 on the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd string. The 7 you can play with a little bar, or you could rearrange the fingers. I prefer using a little bar myself. And it goes like this. We have 8, 7, 8, 7. And it sounds like this. Okay, so it's really cool and easy to play. And finally, in the higher registers, we go to the 10th fret of the 4th string. We have our C, then we have our G flat on the 11th fret. Then we have our A, or better said B double flat, which is our diminished 7th, on the 10th fret of the 2nd, and then the minor 3rd E flat on the 11th fret of the 1st. And it sounds like this. And there you go, 3 positions. The diminished 7th chord is a functional chord, which means you're going to use it for a specific purpose, a modulation, adding movement, and then resolving back. So they're not going to last for long. And so you won't be kind of jamming on them. So you don't need really a scale that you can improvise over a chord like this. You can try it, but it's not the common use. And there actually are not many scales that fit this chord. As a matter of fact, I'm only going to show you one. There are 3 that might work. So there are the 2 symmetrical diminished scale, which are the whole half step and the half whole step, and I will get into one of them presently. And then there's the super Locrian, which is the mode of the harmonic minor scale. But we're only going to look at the first one, because the second one really is more geared towards dominant chords. That's how you usually use it. And the third one, the super Locrian, is it's a very dissonant and strange sounding scale. So it kind of overpowers the chord. It's good to use if you want that specific sound, but otherwise functionally is not really too useful. So we're going to talk about only one scale today. I think it's the first time since we started this series. And it's the whole half scale, which means it's a scale made up of constant alternation between one whole step and a half step, a whole step and a half step, a whole step and a half step, all right? And so from C, I'm going to play it along the fretboard first. So you can see it, I have my C, and then I have whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. Okay, and if I look at it, I figure out that if I play this, I will cover all the right notes, which if you think about it, I'm doing this. I'm doing C, D, E flat, which is my minor 3rd. Then I have F and G flat, which is my diminished 5th. Then I have A flat and B double flat, which is my diminished 7th. And then I have the B and the C, which is my root. So it works. Another way to look at it, if you just look at the notes of the chord, it's like playing the same thing, the same chord, one half step before. You see that? I'm playing the same thing, the same chord of C diminished, but also adding the B diminished on top of it. And we saw that in the augmented scale, when we looked at the augmented chord, and it's a device that you use to have a leading tone to each of the notes. So basically it's like taking a C diminished arpeggio and adding to it the diminished arpeggio one half step before that, which is B. And together it gives you the scale. And it's a very common scale, and it's a whole half scale. So you alternate a whole step and a half step. The mode of this scale is the half whole. And as I said, it would work, but it will require some mental gymnastics, and it doesn't really sound as good. And it's instead used for dominant chords, usually for 7th chords and stuff like that. So we just stick to this one. Okay, so you have the diminished 7th chord. And on top of it, you can try this scale. And usually it will want to go somewhere. So you will want to resolve, and then you'll fall back into whatever scale you were in the key or the scale of the new key. All right, so this is it for the scale section, and this is it for the actual video. I hope it wasn't too long or too complicated. There's really no way around this chord. It is a bit complex, and I trust that as you watch all these videos, and maybe you've been watching all 20 something of them, and you'll keep watching the rest. It all kind of comes together when you become familiar with the structure of chords and their uses, and it gets to be less and less intimidating to find a diminished seventh here, and what's that diminished fifth, and what's a minor third, and oh my god, an augmented 11th, what am I going to do with that? You know, as you watch all these videos, slowly will start to make sense. My advice, if you're having trouble with chords, is to truly study intervals. Okay, and intervals are very important. So knowing the distances and the relationship between all possible notes within themselves and others, it's very important. All right, and I think we did a few things on this channel, but I will eventually do something, maybe on the live streams we do every Saturday. All right, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Please maybe consider subscribing, liking, commenting. It really helps me out to reach more people. And of course, it helps me out as a channel, but I like to think that it also helps out many people who are, you know, starving for information they can trust on music and on guitar playing. All right, so thank you very much. I'll think of a cool chord, maybe a bit easier, yeah, for next week. And I will see you then. Bye-bye.